So Moses and Elijah, yes, they represent the prophets, but they represent those who long to see God. Moses goes up to see God. The disciples go up and see God. Moses' face shines because it reflects the glory of God. Jesus' face shines because he is the glory of God.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sovereign Fire Studios, the show that tackles topics ranging from wild conversion stories and addiction to theology and the gifts of the Spirit, all from a Reformed continuationist perspective. I'm your host, Mason Skaggs. Welcome to Sovereign Fire Studios. We've got a radiant show for you today with Dr. Patrick Schreiner. He's the director of the residency PhD program and associate professor of New Testament and Biblical Theology at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. We'll be talking about his new book, The Transfiguration of Christ. It's going to be lit. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. If you like what we're doing here, pause and give us a glowing 5-star rating. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep up with new content. We drop new content every other Wednesday. We're 100% listener funded. So if you're interested, become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $5 a month. You'll get access to an exclusive show called War Stories, a show where we get a little more fringe, discussing topics like astral projection, spiritual warfare, near-death experiences. I tell in-depth stories from my past life of drug dealing, Satan worshiping darkness, all while keeping Christ firmly at the center and showing his work. So check that out. Without any further delay, let's get into our discussion with Dr. Schreiner. Patrick, I'm so grateful to have you on. First of all, how are you? And for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Yeah, Mason, great to be with you. So I'm in Kansas City. I teach at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, teach New Testament Biblical Theology. We've been here a little over 3 years now, and married to Hannah for 15 years. We have 4 kids from 13 to 6, so 2 in middle school, 2 in elementary school. They love sports. We were excited about the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl, all that good stuff here in Kansas City. So happy to be here and talk to you. Very impressed with your pun game right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I felt the need to apologize for those. But you know what?
What Stephen Colbert says about puns?
No, what's he say?
God is not a fan of puns.
So dumb.
That's all he says. It's just
I mean, I think he's probably right, but okay.
I think that was on an interview with Bart Ehrman, which made it even funnier. So anyways, go watch that interview.
That is funny. I think I have heard that interview is stellar. I've never watched it myself.
I used to play it for classes. It's basically Stephen Colbert takes Bart Ehrman to task and knows way more than he does. Yeah, it's great.
Right, that's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, plug for Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, plug. There you go.
Secondly, the second matter of importance, the people want to know, Patrick, like when I talk to the people, they all say, we want to know. And I say, well, give me a second, I'll find out. Okay, so what is the holiest facial hair a man can have, and why is it the curly handlebar mustache?
Yeah, I mean, I got it. Moses probably had the holiest facial hair, and he probably had a handlebar mustache. Yeah. Because, we're going to be talking about Moses ascending the mountain. That's and right. His face shining, and, that came even through his beard. And so whatever facial hair Moses had is the holiest, and I would guess that all men in heaven will have that facial hair, even if here on earth you cannot grow it. The Lord will give you strength.
Thank you so much for that insight. Yeah. So on a serious note, thank you for writing engaging, fun to read, and beautiful theological books. You put the cookies on the bottom shelf for lay people, and it's a real blessing to the body of Christ. So tell us, what is the Transfiguration, and how does it fit into the larger narrative of the gospel accounts?
Yeah. So the Transfiguration refers to when Jesus goes up on a mountain with the 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, and his body and face shine, which the word we use is it's transfigured, it's transformed. That term was used in ancient literature for gods becoming human, gods becoming like animals. So like Greco-Roman gods becoming down in some form, or in terms of humans becoming godlike. So it's either way, your body's somewhat transformed. The
Mm.
physical appearance changes. In the midst of that, Moses and Elijah appear with Jesus. They've been dead for a very long time, but they appear on the, it seems, right and left of him, flanking him.
Mm.
And they're talking about something Luke actually tells us. We'll probably talk about this. What they're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Peter says, let's make some tents. And a voice from heaven interrupts him and says, this is my beloved son. Listen to him. And then the disciples look up and they see only Jesus. And the narrative continues. What's part of the reason why, if you go to like any Christian bookstore, you won't see many books about the Transfiguration. It's probably a confusing event for many people because,
Yeah.
you know, Jesus is viewed as this very human figure, and then suddenly he's like this bright, shining figure, right? And then he
Mm-hmm.
goes back to being a very human figure. But so it's just confusing to us in terms of like the narrative flow. Like, why does this happen? What is this a picture of? Why did he do it to only 3 disciples? Why weren't the rest of the disciples there? Why do
Mm-hmm.
Moses and Elijah appear? I just think there's a ton of questions. Why was he transfigured? What does that mean? And I think viewing the narrative in its context is really helpful, because in every single synoptic gospel, which is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it occurs at the same place in terms of in the same narrative flow. And it's after Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ. And more importantly, it's after Jesus then tells him, but yes, I am the Messiah, but I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die, and I'm going to raise from the dead. And Peter, as you maybe remember, is so upset about that. He
Yeah.
says, no, there's no way that the Messiah can suffer and die. And then Jesus starts talking about, not only am I going to suffer and die, you're going to suffer and die. You're going to have to take up
Right.
your cross and follow me. And then it's at this point that the transfiguration occurs, which is so important, because I think the point of this narrative, I mean, we can get into the details, but the big point of this narrative is that Jesus is giving them hope and comfort that his death is not going to be the end. He's giving them a preview
Mm.
of his future glory. He's doing more than that, but he's giving them a preview of his future glory, saying, the cross is not the end of my ministry. After the cross, there will be resurrection, ascension, glorification. This is what is coming both for me and for you. Therefore, don't
Mm-hmm.
despair. So he takes 3 disciples up on the mountain to give them, I gave this little phrase in my book, hope by revelation. Hope
Right.
by revelation of who he is. And so that's, I think, the major point in the narrative flow. But there's so much more. I think it shows us a lot about, I'm going to use some big theological terms here: anthropology, who we are; Christology, who Christ is; ecclesiology, glorification; eschatology.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to touch kind of every piece of Christian theology. And so it's one of these texts that's so revealing in terms of who Christ is and in terms of our own future glory ourselves. I think one of the things that people forget is that this isn't just Christ's future, it's our future. As we are
Right.
united to him, we will also shine like the stars of heaven. That's what Daniel says. That's what Revelation says. That's what Matthew
Yeah.
says. And
What
so,
do people call that? Deification?
yeah, so in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, that's
Mm-hmm.
called deification or theosis.
Theosis.
But it's honestly, there's aspects of Eastern Orthodox theology that I'm uncomfortable with in terms of
Mm-hmm.
how they describe deification.
Yeah.
But if you don't erase the creator creature distinction, it's very clear in the scriptures in 2 Peter that he says we become partakers of the divine nature, that we
Yeah.
are glorified. So I think in more Protestant evangelical terms, it's deification is just another term for glorification.
Right.
We will be glorified. We will be like God in some ways.
Yeah.
In what
When we
ways
see
will we?
him.
Yes, we shall. When we see him, we shall be like him. 1 John 3:2. Right? You can just
Mm-hmm.
look at that text. We shall be like him. Well, what does that mean? Well, we will be immortal at that point, right? We won't die, and so we
Right.
will be like him in certain aspects. We won't be like him in other aspects, but um, yeah, I actually am not scared of that language of deification or theosis, even though it's not in the scriptures. I just want to explain what I mean by that,
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
because I do think there's biblical warrant for it, and I read a lot of the church fathers. Basically, all of the church tradition has affirmed a form of deification as long as we define it well. And so
Okay.
it's actually evangelicals that get nervous about the language, but all the church fathers just name it and are like, I want to say name it and claim it, but they do kind of name it and claim it. So there we go.
Yeah. Okay. So you say all there's all this meaning packed into the Transfiguration and so much richness, and you said it touches almost every part of the Christian life and
Yeah.
Christ's work. So why is it so easy to breeze past? Because like I'll be honest, when I first read through it, I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Jesus kind of peels back his human flesh and shows everybody's God.
Yep.
Peter mumbles some weird stuff, and
Yeah.
also Moses and Elijah are there. And then I just keep reading. So why do you think it's so neglected? I know you mentioned it's confusing. Do you think there are other reasons that it's neglected?
Yeah, I mean, I think I give quite a few reasons in the book. One of them I've already named is just that we don't kind of know what to do with those details, and you're kind of speaking to that. It's difficult without kind of a biblical theological picture of what light means, what mountains mean, what face shining like the sun means, the importance of Moses and Elijah. Even if you have some sense of that, it's still like it's a mysterious, mystical event. I
Mm-hmm.
think we tend, now it depends on what sort of person you are, but I think we tend to like more concrete narratives
Yeah.
where it's like we can relate to this. Okay, Jesus was crucified. We know that would hurt a lot. We know that's real. We know that's physical. We know there's
Right.
blood. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But in the Transfiguration, it ends up being spiritual and
Mm-hmm.
kind of confusing. And I would also say in recent kind of scholarship, there's a big push, and I think rightly so, to make heaven more embodied, more concrete, more
Yeah.
earthy, the
Sure.
resurrection of our bodies. So the Transfiguration, if we come to it with a lens of like we're pushing back against heaven as kind of us floating in the clouds playing harps,
Yeah.
which I do think is a good pushback. But we come to the Transfiguration, it does feel a little ethereal and a little like, oh, he's shining and it's spiritual, but we like the embodied nature of things. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think we almost become too earthly minded in the pushback, and then we forget about the spiritual reality. We already mentioned deification. We maybe get nervous about deification with this text if you know anything about it, because this is the key text for Eastern Orthodoxy in
Mm-hmm.
deification. And then the other thing I'd say is like it's not in the major creeds. It's the Transfiguration is not listed as one of the key events,
Yeah.
and it might even feel a little minor in terms of like the storyline of the scriptures. Like major events in Christ's life are like birth, death, resurrection. But Transfiguration is like, yeah, if you were to summarize Christ's life, I would guess 99% of people would like not mention the Transfiguration, right? Like you would just kind of
Yeah.
be like, okay, he was born, he lived, he did some miracles, he called some disciples, and then he died, and then he rose from the dead. Like quick summary, the Transfiguration kind of feels like
A
you could
minor.
kind of bypass it and not miss a lot.
Yeah.
Even one either I said this or somebody else, I can't even remember if this was original to me, but it was said, or I thought, it kind of feels like an actor has missed his cues. Like in the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Transfiguration, it's like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm shiny and bright, and then it's like, and I'm gonna go back. It's like, wait, it's too early, like it's not time for that yet. And so if you erase the Transfiguration, the other way I like to think of it, if you erase the Transfiguration, would our theology be any different?
Mm.
Like, because it is kind of like this preview of this future glory, and it's like, wait, did we need that? They don't even understand still because they're confused after his death.
Yeah.
So it feels like we can just read over it really quickly and not kind of get the importance of it. So there's a lot of reasons why we overlook it, but there's a
Yeah.
few.
Yeah. So obviously we shouldn't overlook it. You wrote a whole book about it, so you're a fan of Transfiguration as we should be. And so as we dig into that, why is the Transfiguration so important? And like, what does it mean for our lives today? What do we make of it?
Yeah, I could say so much. Maybe I'd begin by saying we tend to focus on the means by which we're saved, which is the cross, which is glorious, and we should do that. The Gospels give the majority of their time to Christ's passion, as we call it. But there can be a tendency to neglect the goal of salvation. So there's a means by the cross, through his blood, through substitutionary atonement. But the goal is actually union with God, and the goal is glorification with him. And so one of the reasons why it's so important is because this is showing us actually like what is to come. And that is really what the cross grants us, which is not more important than the cross. That would be like imprecise to say that. But it is the goal. It is the goal, like that we would see Christ and that we would be transformed by seeing him. And so if you want to think about like what's most important in terms of the storyline of the scripture, well, it is helpful to think in terms of like, where is this all going? What are we longing for?
Yeah.
And the transfiguration kind of gives us a little picture of what is to come. So I'd say it's hugely important for that reason. The other thing I'd say is it's hugely important, and this is a big part of what I do in this book, is that most people only think of the transfiguration either as, and so I don't know like where people are on this, because I was like, well, which one's more prominent? It probably depends if you're in like the academy or in the church more, to be perfectly honest. But either as this is the revelation as Jesus is God, or this is the revelation of Jesus as the glorified man. Does that make sense? So it sounds like the same thing, but I think probably in the church, we typically look at this text and we're like, oh, Jesus is God. That's what this text is showing us. In the academy, it's actually opposite, that most scholars look at this and they're like, oh, this is the future glory of the Messiah after he dies and rises again, that the Father will grant him this glory as the glorified man, as the glorified Messiah. So my book is actually saying both are true,
right?
And you can't separate the two. So what I'm trying to say here, I'm trying to phrase it in different ways, is that the transfiguration is a picture of Jesus's past and eternal glory that will then be manifested in the God man in the future as well. And that one leads to the other. So is it a future glory or a past glory? It's both and, because only the one with past glory is going to be glorified with a future glory,
right?
Who now has a body. And so it combines this like heavenly and earthly reality, or this embodied physical Jesus Christ is truly man and he will be glorified like we are glorified, and this reality that he's the eternally begotten Son who had glory from the beginning. Maybe I'll just read you one text. I think it's John. Let me look it up really quick.
Are you thinking John 17:5?
Yeah,
glorify
John 17:5,
me?
I think is my thesis. In short, right? And he says, now, Father, glorify me. I think the transfiguration can be summarized by that term glory, even though it doesn't use that term, doxa, glory. Glorify me in your presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. Wait, so it's actually really confusing if you stop to think about it, because it's like, glorify me now with the glory I already have. And you're like, wait a second. Why do you need glory if you already have glory?
Right.
Like this is the reality of the scriptures. Jesus Christ is the Son of God who has always possessed glory because he is the second person of the triune God. But as he takes on flesh, he lowers himself. And there's a unique sense in which he's granted glory as the God-man.
Yeah.
And so now in John 17:5, he's saying, Father, glorify me with the glory I've always had. Because now there is something unique about him taking on flesh. And so the transfiguration is about both of those glories. It's about the glory that he always had and the glory that is to come. And so I think helping readers see, so you asked me, why is it so important? It shows Jesus Christ, as the Chalcedonian Creed said, is truly God and truly man. I just preached a sermon on this. As a Christian, you can't see one thing about Christ. You must say two things about Christ, or you're not a Christian. You can't just say he's truly God, and you can't just say he's truly man. You have to say he's truly God and he's truly man. And the transfiguration is maybe one of the clearest texts that proves that. It's not the only text, and it's probably not the text we run to prove that. But I do think it is one of the most revealing texts in that regard.
definitely one of the clearest pictures. It may not
Yeah.
be like, exegetically with the most explicit with words, but
Yes. Yeah.
the
And
picture
that's
is.
can I just you made me think of the other thing that I didn't say. That's the other reason we neglect it, because we are we are a little scared of pictures.
Yeah.
So like we like the teachings of Jesus, but we get scared of iconography, right?
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
so like the visual nature of this scene bothers Protestants, I think, a little bit, if I can just say that. But it's in the scriptures, right? So um, I think another reason why we might look past it is the visual nature of this is like it just sits a little uneasy with us.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Okay, and one thing you mentioned made me think of how this impacts everyday believers and why it should be something we meditate on, and why people should pick up your book. Uh, that pattern of John 17:5, glorify me, Father, with
Yeah,
the glory that I had before the world began. We have a version of that we were chosen before the foundation of the earth. So
that's
we
right.
are in some sense, called, and now that we're regenerated, we're seated with Christ in the heavenly places. We have a level of glory. We're moving
Yep.
from glory to glory, though. And so it's that patterning, like you said. This is nestled in every in all of the synoptic gospels. After Peter's confession, Jesus reveals he's going to be crucified, and then, if I remember right, Jesus also reveals that we're going to pick up our crosses
That's
and
right.
follow him.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it is that pattern that gives us hope, like you said, through that revelation. Am I getting
That's
that
right.
right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and I think you're hitting on how is this a comfort, or what does this mean for us today? Well, I think Paul is actually reflecting upon this event that he's been told about. He wasn't there, but in Second
Mm-hmm.
Corinthians 3:18, he says, "And we all with unveiled faces," referring back to Moses. He's been talking about Moses, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed. That's actually the same word as transfigured, right? It's translated differently. Transfigured, the Greek word behind it, is only used 4 times in the whole Bible. That's in Matthew's account, Mark's account of the transfiguration, 2 Corinthians 3:18, and then Romans 12:1 and 2, when it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's the word transfigured. So I like to translate it transfigured just because it kind of shakes us up from our Christianese a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So he's saying, we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transfigured into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord who is Spirit. So how does this give us hope? How does this encourage us day by day? Well, Paul earlier, or maybe later, actually, in the next chapter, we'll talk about we all will suffer as Christians. This light momentary affliction is not worth being compared to the eternal weight of glory that is to be ours.
Mm.
So he compares the light momentary suffering that we have now, and he says that's not even worth weighing or putting on the scale next to the eternal weight of glory. In other words, if you have a scale, the glory's worth way more. So you can get through the suffering now. And I think that's exactly what's going on in this narrative. Jesus is saying, look, I am going to suffer and you're going to suffer, but glory is to come. Eternal weight of glory is to come. And you want to see that? Let me show you the glory. And they're like, I can't even look at this. They fall down like dead, right? He has to touch
Yes.
them. And so like they don't even, and we don't even have the capacity. This is why, and here's another side note. Here's my rabbit trail.
Go for it. Yeah.
We in our physical bodies can't comprehend that glory, which is why we need spiritual bodies, why we need transformed bodies,
Mm-hmm.
because we will literally, like, the skin will melt off our face, as basically God said to Moses, like, you can't see my face and live because you're a
Yeah.
human being in the flesh. What we need is transformed bodies, because with transformed bodies, we will then be able to perceive and see this glory that will so overwhelm us that we can't handle it. And
Oh,
the
yeah.
point of that rabbit trail is that this glory is more glorious than you can imagine. And that should give you hope in the darkest times. If you feel like you're in a valley right now, Jesus is saying the Mount of Transfiguration should be encouragement to you. And then start
Yes.
thinking through the scriptures, right? Revelation says, what are we going to receive? White robes. Well,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? in the Transfiguration, it was like his clothes were as white as light, right? So it's
super
like,
white. Yeah.
yes, it's like as I keep saying, whiter than OxyClean can make them.
Yeah.
Mark says no laundromat could make these any whiter, and I'm like, I don't know. There's some good laundromats, but he's like, no, this is supernatural white, right?
Yeah.
And there's like a purity to that, and so this picture I do think is just like it's to give the three disciples hope and comfort. Ultimately, it's putting our eyes on that future state which is to come,
Yeah.
that will be ours as we are united to Christ. And that if we keep that vision before us, right? If we keep that, when I preached a few weeks ago at Emmaus, I told that story of Florence Chadwick when she was swimming across, right, from Catalina Island to the shore of California. And she kept the shoreline in her picture, even through the fog.
Yeah.
I love that image because it's like we all have fog in our lives that's
Right.
blocking our vision. But she was like, no, I'm going to keep the shoreline in my mind, and that's going to keep me going. I think that's a great image of how we walk through suffering in the Christian life. We keep the shoreline in our mind's eye, that golden shore, in the same way we keep like our future glorification in mind and say, okay, the suffering is coming. He promises to be with us in it, but there is an eternal weight of glory that is coming for us.
Yes, that is so good, and that's why I love. That's why I love your writings, and that's why I think this book is really important for not just theologians, not just the academic crowd, but there is a really practical application. Like, you got to believe that Peter and the other disciples who were martyred had a few things in mind when they were hanging on the cross,
Yeah,
or
definitely.
and this
Yeah.
had to have
Thinking
been
back
one
to
of them.
these things. That's right. Yeah. Peter even mentions it in his second epistle, right? It's mentioned in the Gospels, but he's using the Transfiguration, 2 Peter 1, like 16 through 19, to confirm that the Lord is coming back.
Yeah,
Essentially, in 2 Peter, there's false teachers that are saying, hey,
he
you
already
say he's
returned.
coming back, but who knows if it's actually going to happen? And Peter's like,
Right.
no, I was on the Mount of Transfiguration. I saw the future glory. I was there. And
Yeah.
you have the word more fully confirmed even now. So he uses this event to basically smash the false teachers and say, like, I was an eyewitness and I know it's coming because I saw him transfigured, which is so cool because he's saying, look, like, this should give us hope in the midst of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So we've touched on some of the some of the meaning, but let's get into some of those details that
Sure. Yeah.
are shrouded in mystery for people sometimes. So, like,
Clouded. There's a
clouded in
cloud.
mystery. There is
Yeah,
a
there you go.
cloud.
Pun,
But
you know?
let's start with I like your pun. I thought it was good, Patrick.
Yeah, good.
What about Moses and Elijah?
Yeah.
Because, like, everybody's going to say, well, Elijah represents the prophets, Moses represents the law, and here Jesus is fulfilling both of them. Is that all that it is, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Moses and Elijah appear to confirm Jesus. So you think Hebrews 3 and 4, the author of the Hebrews compares Moses to Jesus, and he goes, Moses was a servant. He was amazing, but Christ is the son, right? And he deserves more glory. And it's interesting here, you have, this is my beloved son, which is the response. So I do think even the Father's voice from the heavens saying, this is my beloved son, is saying, and listen to him, saying he's superior to Moses and Elijah. Now, as Christians, we're like, well, of course, but think about Jews at the time. Moses and Elijah were like the biggest figures in their traditions, right? Maybe Abraham should be included in that. But it's like Abraham, Moses, and Elijah. And these two figures show up, and the Father's voice says, listen to him. He is my ultimate revelation. It makes me think of Hebrews 1 through 4, like in the past, God has spoken by the prophets, but in these final days, he has spoken by his son. It's a better revelation, right?
Yeah.
And throughout Hebrews, it actually says, you must pay closer attention to this. That's listen to him, not necessarily even like he completes, he fulfills them. So it is that they are represent the law and the prophets, but I think there's a lot more going on. The other, I could say a lot of different things, but the other piece that I think is hugely important is that Moses has a narrative pattern in his life of wanting to see more of God. Elijah also has a narrative pattern of wanting to see more of God. Both of them go up, it seems, on the same mountain and ask to see God, and God meets them there. So it's in Exodus 33 and 1 Kings 17 or 19, maybe somewhere around there. But you have Moses. So let's briefly trace this narrative pattern. Moses sees some of who Yahweh is in the burning bush. I think that's a small picture of Mount Sinai. Then he gets even more revelation on Mount Sinai, and his face glows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in Exodus 33, he says, Lord, show me your glory. I want to see more. Basically, this is Moses yearning for, like, I want more of your presence, which is a good desire.
Yeah.
And the Lord says to him, though, you, Moses, can't see my face or you will die. So I will hide you in the cleft of the rock, and I will put my hand in front of me, and I will show you my back. Now, of course, God doesn't have a face. God doesn't have a back. God doesn't have a hand. The point is, Moses can't see the essence of God and still live, right? The
Right.
face is the most personal aspect of a person, right? So you see someone face to face, there's a unique closeness that you have to a person. So I
Yeah.
think they're using these images to describe what Moses is longing to see of God. So Moses gets this picture of God's back, but I think his longing to see the face of God, the person of God, is fulfilled in the transfiguration, right?
Yeah.
So now Moses on a new mountain sees the face of Yahweh in the face of Jesus Christ.
The image
And
of the invisible God, the
that's right,
full,
the
the
image of the
exact
invisible
imprint.
God. That's right. That's exactly right. And you think about again, Hebrews and John. He's the light of the world. He's come into this world. He's the radiance of the glory of God. That's all
Yes.
transfiguration imagery, right? So
Yeah.
one of the things that this narrative for me is, like, all this light imagery started to click for me, and it's like, oh, even in the is it the Nicene Creed that says he's light from light? I'm like, where did they get that? Oh, transfiguration, right?
Mm.
Like, this is where they're getting this imagery.
Yeah.
And so Moses and Elijah, yes, they represent the prophets, but they represent those who long to see God. So Elijah has a similar event where he goes up onto a mountain, and God doesn't appear to him in the earthquake or in the fire, but he appears to him in a soft whisper. And actually, most scholars think that's the same place Moses was at. And so there's a link between those two, between Moses and Elijah. And now their desires are ultimately fulfilled. And so that actually goes back to my point earlier where I said this narrative is not only about Jesus being God, but it's about Jesus being man. The law and the prophets, he's the new messianic king, messianic prophet. So they predicted that, but he's also God in terms of he's the one Moses longed to see. So a lot of people, and if I can just double click on this, a lot of people, when they talk about this event, they speak about Jesus is the new Moses here because he goes up on the mountain, his face shines, he comes down the mountain, so forth and so on. That's exactly like Moses on Mount Sinai. But he's also different than Moses because Moses goes up to see God. The disciples go up and see God. Moses' face shines because it reflects the glory of God. Jesus' face shines because he is the glory of God.
That's
So
so
while
good.
he is like Moses, he's also unlike Moses. So another way to say that is Jesus both ascends the mountain as man and he descends upon the mountain as God, because he is the one that I mean, I believe in Christophanies. We can
Yeah, for
that's a whole
sure.
nother topic, but
Yeah.
he's the one that Moses longed to see. Maybe he is even the one that Moses saw in some form. Think about Ezekiel, where he saw a human form on the throne, Isaiah,
Yeah.
some human form. What did Moses see on the top of Mount Sinai? Well, it's not entirely clear because there's fire and there's smoke and something's cloudy for him. But now it's revealed in brightness. And so it's a revelation scene. But I always want to warn people, and this isn't a whole nother topic, but it's a revelation scene, but there's also still a cloud because we long for the day when we will truly see him. So the cloud kind of hides him in some sense too. And the light is overpowering. So the light this took me a while because the light is revelatory, but the light is also blinding. In theological terms, this is cataphatic and apophatic theology. In other words, it's revelation of who he is, but it's also a denial in terms of you can't ultimately see him. The light blinds you. And I think that that imagery is actually really helpful for us to recognize that the rest of the scriptures affirm we can't see God, right? He dwells in unapproachable light. 1 Timothy 6:16, I think it is. No one can see God. No one has seen God. No one can see God. And it's like, wait a second. But then Jesus says, those who have seen me have seen the Father. And so it's like that's the paradox of the scriptures. So, man, that's a lot of stuff, but you got me going. So there it is.
That was awesome.
We talked a little bit about Moses and Elijah, but they're discussing a topic with Jesus. They're talking about his departure or his exodus.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, only Luke gives us what I call the minutes of the meeting between Moses and Elijah and Jesus. And it's so fascinating to think about, like, they show up and what are, like, are they in the realm of the dead? Or are they in the heavens? There's debates about that. And then they're like, okay, we're with Jesus now. Hey, let's talk about this. But we don't know all the details of that. The point, though, is that Moses was involved in the first Exodus. And I'm sure he has some questions, or some, like, Jesus is giving him some clarifications of, like, hey, your old Exodus, now it's going to come true in my Exodus in terms of my own kind of passion, my Passover. And so I think Jesus is honestly just laying out for him salvation history. And Moses is like, light bulbs are just going off, like, oh, this is so cool. Like the blood over the door, right? They're having a mini Bible study, right? Like on the Emmaus Road.
Right.
And Moses and Elijah are recognizing, I mean, First Peter talks about, like, they searched and inquired carefully into, like, the times and the seasons when the Christ would come. But it was revealed they were not serving themselves, but you. And I think here Moses and Elijah are like, oh, even though Elijah didn't write anything down, right? They're like, oh, we were serving this new era. It was all pointing forward to you. And so what's nice here, though, is that here's another confirmatory little note that the transfiguration is both about death and suffering, his exodus, right? And about the glory. So we have that confirmed in the context before in terms of Jesus predicting his death, but also internal to the narrative, they're discussing his exodus. And what's interesting is that voice says, listen to him, right? Listen to him in terms of his suffering. He will suffer, you will suffer. That's what they're so bothered by, right? That's what the disciples are so bothered by. And maybe even Moses and Elijah are a little confused about why the Messiah is going to suffer. So he's explaining to them, like, this is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. Jews, what do they stumble over? The suffering Messiah, the cross of Christ. And so what was so hard for Jewish people to get at that point was that their Messiah was going to die. So Jesus and Moses and Elijah have this conversation about his exodus, about his death, while he's glorified. And they're like, oh, now we get it. Okay, it's through death and suffering that glory will come. So it's confirming the larger point of the narrative, I think.
Yeah. Somewhere in the midst of this conversation, Peter, I love Peter because I feel like he always asks and says the things that maybe everybody's thinking, and he's super impulsive, but he says, let me make some booths for you guys.
That's right.
What's the deal with the booths?
Yeah. So Peter, in Mark and Luke, I think it's Mark, it says he didn't know what to say, or they were terrified. Like, it makes it clear. I don't think it says in Matthew that he was terrified, but it's pretty clear, like, this is supposed to be viewed as like he doesn't know what's going on, right? When he says this, people are like, okay, tents, is this like the new tent of meeting? Is this the new festival of booths? Kind of thinking back to Old Testament traditions. It's certainly possible that he's alluding to that, but there's some problems actually with those views of, like, why would he say, let's make some tents? If it's the tent of meeting, why is he saying, let's make three, right? There's only one tent of meeting. That's the tabernacle. That's the temple. Only Jesus should be residing in the temple if he's saying, let's make a new tabernacle. So I don't think that argument works. Also, the tent of meeting is confusing because it's like one for Moses, one for Jesus, one for Elijah. If it's the tabernacles, there should also be some for the other three disciples. So maybe 6 tents, not 3. So the number issue becomes a problem for some of those views. So I think we should just simplify what's going on here. Peter is making 2 mistakes here. It's the number of things he wants to make and what he wants to make, tents, right? So what is a tent? A tent is a place of dwelling. So when he says, let's make 3 tents here, he's trying to prolong the glory of the situation, which is totally natural. Hey, can we hang out here for a while? Is
Right.
it time to go? Can we make this last a little longer? So I think when he says let's make tents, he's trying to say let's bring in the kingdom now. Like let's have you dwell, Moses and Elijah. There is at the end of Malachi, it says before the Messiah comes, Elijah will appear. So I think he's seen Elijah and he's seen Moses and he's like, it's go time. Like now the Messiah is glorified. Now he's going to pick up the sword, still probably confused about his death. Right. So let's build some tents. Let's dwell here. And then let's go fight the Romans and bring in the kingdom to Israel. So trying to prolong the event. The other thing to say is the 3 tents. He's mistaken about how many tents to make. So when the voice comes and overshadows them, it interrupts Peter and says, no, this is my beloved son. I think Peter misunderstands both the suffering that the son must go through. So he's saying, let's have glory now, and the singularity of the son. It's not that Moses and Elijah and Jesus all belong in the same type of tent. No, the voice says, this one is my beloved son. So to make 3 tents is to put him on the same playing field as Moses and Elijah. And I think the Father's voice is saying, no, you don't do that. Jesus is my son. They are servants. Yeah. So Peter is misunderstanding 2 things, that suffering is coming and that Jesus is superior to Moses and Elijah.
That seems pretty classic, Peter. And also, he seems like a simple enough guy to where it's like, he may not be thinking this Feast of Booths, tabernacle type, ideas. Right. He's just like, this is awesome. Let's stay here.
This is awesome. No, it's just, again, like I said, totally natural. If an awesome event occurs, you're like, can we just pause time right now and make this last? So I think that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, really cool. Okay, now, so the cloud descends and a voice comes from it. And then when the cloud lifts, it's just Jesus. Yeah. So like you said in the beginning, it kind of leaves the reader feeling like, okay, why did it just why is it so quick and then back to normal? And then to add to a little bit of the confusion, Jesus charges them not to tell anybody else. Yeah. Right. Until his resurrection.
Yeah.
What's
so much
that?
going on there? Well, first, maybe even say the bright cloud. I think that's like the Shekinah cloud. This is entering the presence of the Lord. This is, we can build 3 tents here, but we're in the presence of God himself. This is the new temple reality. I argue in my book, the cloud is representative of the Holy Spirit as well. So I think we have a Trinitarian scene here. Because in the Old Testament, the Spirit appeared in cloud and in fire, and he did also in wind and in fire on Pentecost. So the pillar of cloud that led them by night, I think the rest of the prophets attribute kind of that appropriation of a person of the Trinity to the Spirit. This scene is also linked to the baptism of Jesus, because in the baptism it says, this is my beloved son. The Spirit appears as a dove there. I think the Spirit appears as a cloud here. And so I think that helps us in terms of, this is a Trinitarian scene. You have the Father's voice. You have the Spirit appearing as a bright cloud. All the church fathers affirm this. I couldn't find one that didn't. Luther affirmed this. It goes through the Christian tradition. It's basically in the modern period that people stop saying that. And the voice speaks out of the cloud, which is exactly what happens in the Exodus. It's the voice of Yahweh comes from the Spirit. Like this fits with all of our theology. He says, this is my beloved son. That alludes back to Psalm 2, I think Genesis 22, the binding of Isaac. Yeah. This is my beloved son. So you have a suffering text also, with whom I'm well pleased. Isaiah 42, that's another suffering text. And then Daniel 7, son of man. And then he says, listen to him. There's so much going on there in the background. Deuteronomy 18:15 talks about a new prophet's going to come. Yeah. They need to listen to him. Yeah. The Shema and Deuteronomy also says, listen, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. So again, confirming this idea that Jesus is both man and God. But yes, as you say, the disciples are terrified. They fall on their faces, and then they look up and it's only Jesus. I think that's showing it's all about Jesus. It's kind of like a little point, it's not about Moses. It's not about Elijah. It's all about Jesus. Yeah. And then Jesus says to them, don't tell anyone about this. So it goes back to the question of why did he only bring 3 disciples? Sure. And why did he, if this was supposed to be a comfort to them, a hope to them, why isn't he showing the rest of the disciples? Yeah. Why is he not giving that comfort and hope to those other disciples? And that question is still, it actually still, I struggle with it. I read a lot about it from the church fathers. All the church fathers affirm Judas could not be there because he could not see the glory of God like this.
Right.
Because he was not saved. And so he didn't belong on that mountain. And so that's one of the things the church fathers say. The other thing the church fathers say, which I think they're right about, is Peter, James, and John have a unique closeness to Jesus.
Yeah.
They have a unique picture of his death as well. And so he gives the three disciples that are closest to him a picture of the hope that is to come. But he tells them to not tell the other disciples, because Peter's confused, the other disciples would be even more confused. And he's still not ready to reveal his glory to all the disciples. So it's like, it ties in, I think, to that idea of the messianic secret, that Jesus is revealing himself, but he's revealing himself in ways that he's trying to redefine who he is so they don't misunderstand him. And if they see the glory too early, I think the rest of the disciples will try to make him king and they'll get confused. So I think he tells them, don't tell them this until the Son of Man is raised from the dead, because this should confirm the glory that is mine. And then they will know, hey, we were with him on the mountain. He told us not to tell you, but he showed us this was to come. But you would have misunderstood the point. So he told us not to tell you. It's almost like, maybe the best example is like, you can't tell your kids certain things until a certain age, right?
Yeah.
They're going to misunderstand. It's like you don't have the birds and the bees conversation really early. You just wait, okay?
Yeah.
Now, this is not the birds and the bees conversation, but this is like, hey, guys, you're not ready for this. Let's pause this. But I need to show a few of the disciples this. So there is this kind of blocking their vision while revealing something at the same time.
That fits in with what Jesus does throughout his ministry too. He's like, I thank you, Father, that you have hidden these things from the wise and discerning and revealed them to little children. Or like when he heals the lepers and tells them, like, don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anyone. Yes.
Or no, was it two blind men?
Yeah.
And they go
There's
and tell
multiple
everybody.
times.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. He's often, and he calls himself the Son of Man because it's just a human one. And they're like, well, what is this human one? And it's only Peter who confesses he's the Messiah. He doesn't call himself the Messiah. You know, it's the gospel writers who call him the Messiah, because if he says those words, they're so loaded in the Jewish mind, they will misunderstand. And you see that in this narrative, because Peter misunderstands it. He's like, the Messiah is not supposed to suffer. But Jesus or the Father quotes a verse that says, no, this is the suffering Son. This is my beloved Son. This is the servant. This is the new Isaac. This is the one that will be sacrificed. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that is so beautiful. Okay. Now, so we've kind of went through the whole process. Now, I'd like to know, as you were researching and writing this, what was the most thrilling thing to you or like the thing that was most, something that stuck out to you that was most beautiful and that stuck with you?
Everything I've just said. No, I'm just kidding. There are so many things. I would say, like right now, reflecting on God as light and just like digging into that and meditating on that was really beneficial for me. And now every time I see light imagery in the scriptures, it just like pops in the Bible. And I don't even, I think it goes back to that light is both blinding and revealing, and that the reality of God is both overwhelming and enlightening. And it's just like both those realities are really like dear to me now. The other thing is kind of a weird one. There's very few comments about Jesus's clothes.
Yeah.
And I started to wonder, why are his clothes shining? What is like the point? Okay, his face shines and his clothes shine. But as I thought about it, and you start thinking about like a biblical theology of clothes, this is what weirdos, nerds like me do, right? I start thinking about a biblical theology of clothes. Clothes both reveal and hide.
Yeah. Oh,
they
wow.
cover, but they also reveal the form of your body. Also, clothes are an extension of you and your personality in a way, right?
Yeah.
And so whatever touches Jesus is going to be transformed, just like the clothes touch his body. So as we touch Jesus, we will be transformed. Ooh. I also think there's something to be said for the biblical theology of the first thing that humans made or tried to make were their own clothes.
Right.
And then Jesus reclothed them. And now in the ultimate new heavens and new earth, he will give us new clothes again. So this whole
that's
like
good.
clothes reality is like really cool to me. And I thought I'd love to almost do like a devotion or a meditation, you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
of the reality of clothes and how they speak to, I don't think Christians, we when we hear of clothes, we're like materialism. That's all we think, like, materialism. But there's a deeper like sense to what clothes are. And you know that even from Acts, when you have these weird narratives where like they touch Paul's clothes or Peter's shadow falls on them and they're healed. And you're like, what is going on here? But again, it's the extension of the person in material things, which shows you as we are enveloped into Jesus, we are transformed, and even material things are transformed, which is, it gives you like a little picture into the new heavens and new earth, that like, not only will we shine, but everything that we make will be bright. You know what I mean? Isn't that cool to think about?
That's awesome.
So like the music that you make, Mason, and the books that I make or whatever, right? There's going to be a brightness, a glorified version of them, which is going to be awesome. So
that is just going to be amazing. Man, I can't help but think of like Adam and Eve when they make their clothes.
Yes.
They're concealing darkness and damage that they've done. They're concealing their shame. And then when people touch Jesus, even the fringe of his garments, he's healing damage.
That's right. That's right.
And then like you have in Exodus, when the commandments of the priestly garments. And
That's
stuff.
right. Yeah, they're shiny too. Shiny garments.
Yeah, they're glorious.
Yeah.
So we've got to start a clothing line called Transfigured Clothing.
It's like all the painting companies, the Christian ones, they're like transformed houses or something like that, right? And you think about in Genesis, you have all these jewels that seem to be in the garden, all these stones, and then Revelation, these shiny stones for the new heavens. And then the priests wear these stones upon their breasts, and they're wearing shiny clothing. So there's other ways to even look at the transfiguration in terms of prophet, priest, and king. Jesus is the new prophet like Moses. Jesus is the new king. This is my beloved son. He's the new priest too, who's shining in the presence of God in the glory cloud. There's so many different, this is where it's like 8 verses in Matthew, maybe 7 verses in Mark or something like that. But your whole Bible is really packed into these verses, which is so cool, right?
Totally amazing. Yeah, well, thank you so much for unpacking those things for us. Now, I'm going to do something that you will either love or hate. I'm going to ask you rapid fire questions so you can respond.
Speed round.
A speed round.
Do it.
And you can say pass, but if you do, there's a lot of shame that comes with that. There's
a lot of consequences.
Yeah.
This is like when we play gestures with my kids. You can't pass on the thing that you get. You've got to try to act it out. You know.
That's right. Yeah. So give it your best shot. All right. These are some of these are controversial. None of them will get you into any trouble. So.
Great. Okay. I'm so excited.
So James 5:14. If any are sick, let them call for the elders, anointing with oil. What do you think of this? Is the oil we were just talking about how material things have some significance. Of course they do, but like, is the oil significant? What do you think of this passage?
Yeah, I think if we define what a sacrament is, I don't think oil is necessarily a sacrament, but I do think material things participate in heavenly realities. Ooh. So I'm very comfortable with saying oil is a sign of a deeper inner spiritual reality, and that we shouldn't be afraid of the connection between material things and spiritual things. The deeper reality is the spiritual one, right? But that doesn't mean we need to neglect the material reality. I think baptism, Lord's Supper is the ultimate expression of that. I think oil and other physical signs also participate in greater spiritual realities too.
That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so now changing gears.
I have no idea if the other elders at Emmaus agree with me, but here we go. No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm just asking you.
You're just asking me. Yeah.
Now, do you believe God communicates through dreams and visions today? Like, I know you've probably heard of Muslims, for example, or I know a brother at our church actually who has had some experiences with people who've had visions and dreams that help to lead them to the Lord. What do you think about that, man?
Yeah, I think he still communicates in dreams and visions. The only thing I would say as a follow-up to that is everything must be tested by the scriptures.
Absolutely. Like Thessalonians would have said as well.
Yeah.
Corinthians.
Yeah, certainly he communicates. His ultimate revelation is in the Son. His ultimate revelation is in the scriptures, but he still communicates to us personally.
Yeah. Now, third question. You mentioned this, which I think is kind of funny, but is there something innately spiritual about mountains? Is the spiritual realm closer to peaks and mountains?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. There are in the scriptures and in reality, which is why I miss Portland so much. Because we're by mountains, and why Missouri. This is flyover land, right? Nobody comes here because there's no mountains.
It's true.
Yeah,
we'll take
mountains are places where heaven and earth meet, symbolically and in reality. You are between heaven and earth. It's also places of union. If you think of a mountain comes to a point of union. The point of our life is union with God. Mountains are places of revelation. Mountains are places where you can see things to scale finally. I think if you've ever climbed a mountain, you have a spiritual experience. You do. And so mountains are hugely significant in the Bible and hugely significant for reality. So yeah, and that doesn't mean heaven is up in the sky. That's symbolic. It's all symbolic, but it's also, it's hard to describe for us, right? It's beyond our conception of space and place. But I think mountains are spiritual. Yeah.
Wow. This was so much better than I even imagined. Thank you.
Now, Mason, just to be clear, I think you should come to church rather than climbing a mountain on Sundays, though.
Crap.
Still,
okay.
So another spiritual place is where the people of God gather. So
that is incredibly helpful.
I had to say that a lot in the Pacific Northwest because people would climb mountains instead of going to church. So there's always, in one sense, I understand because they do have a spiritual experience doing that, but the scriptures also confirm where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am amongst them.
Yeah, right.
So,
do not neglect the gathering of yourselves together. Well, Patrick Schreiner, man, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Guys, thanks for tuning in. The book is available. When does it release?
February 27th. So about 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah, so this will be coming out about 1 week, maybe a half a week before the book comes out, and it is called The Transfiguration of Christ.
An exegetical and theological reading, because it's a nerd book.
Nerd book, but as with everything you write, it's gonna put the treasures out front.
Yep. So I hope anybody can read it. So
y'all, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Until then, remember that God is sovereign. His word is sufficient, and His Spirit is still moving.